Thank you, Madam Deputy President. I just rise to add some comments in relation to this committee report as well. Of course, the Australian Greens have had a very proud and long history raising serious concerns about how successive federal governments have intended to impose a national nuclear waste dump on various communities. And let me be absolutely clear, Madam Deputy President. It seems that time and time again the Commonwealth continues to try and put these dumps in areas where there is strong community opposition, particularly from First Australians, and with a hope, perhaps a naive hope, that because it's in the outback, it's out of sight, out of mind. The views of those Aboriginal communities are not as important as, indeed, if the debate was being held about whether the dump was going into the northern, western, eastern or southern suburbs of a capital city. As a South Australian, of course, I'm extremely concerned about the impact on having a national nuclear waste dump in South Australia, and particularly when the government has not been upfront with the community about the impact that this dump will have, the type of waste that this dump will hold. For a long time, the federal government refused to accept and to acknowledge, be honest about the fact that intermediate waste would be stored in these facilities. We now know that that is well and truly the case, and even then, despite that, not stored properly, temporary storage, which begs the question, Madam Deputy President, well, where will it go after that? And it seems ludicrous to go through this whole process and only to be storing intermediate level waste in an inappropriate manner for what is deemed to be temporary. Now, let's be clear about what temporary means. The minister himself on ABC radio in South Australia some weeks ago said that temporary meant 100 years. So for 100 years, the outback in South Australia, the Flinders Ranges, could be hosting intermediate level waste above ground. And this is just a dangerous and ludicrous proposition. South Australia has a proud history of our beautiful ecotourism and outback, celebrating our outback environment. The idea that we would turn the Flinders Ranges, of all places, into a nuclear waste dump is just gobsmacking. South Australians won't accept it. We don't like it. We're not going to accept it, and we will fight it all the way. This report, as tabled by the committee, and the dissenting report tabled by myself representing the Greens, makes it very clear that the fight over this location of a nuclear waste dump is far from over. We know the communities in both Hawker and in Kimba have been torn apart by this process. They are hurting, they feel manipulated, they feel undermined. They've had neighbour turn against neighbour in relation to this issue. It has been the absolute opposite to generating community consensus. It has torn families apart, this issue, and the way this has been managed by the federal government. The dishonesty, the mismanagement and the heavy-handedness. The local traditional owners in both Kimba and in Hawker are strongly opposed to having a nuclear waste dump. And in fact, when I was out in Hawker some weeks ago, visiting locals there, talking to local business owners, tourism operators and members of the Aboriginal communities there, it was quite clear of how concerned people are. And I was shocked to learn, Madam Deputy President, that one of the locations for where the government wants to put a nuclear waste dump in the Flinders Ranges is on a secret women's site. Now, what is even more horrifying is that, of course, the land that has been nominated, Madam Deputy President, is part-owned by former Senator Grant Chapman, a former Liberal senator, and he's put up his property for an option to host the dump. No consultation with his neighbours. This hosting of a nuclear waste dump on a sacred women's site in the Flinders Ranges is just abhorrent. And I must say it has echoes of the Hindmarsh Island Bridge saga. Of course, it was the same family, Madam Deputy President, the Chapman family in South Australia, who pushed for the creation of the Hindmarsh Bridge, despite it impacting on a sacred women's site. Fast forward all of these years later, and we now have culturally significant land in the Flinders Ranges, important to the local Indigenous population, particularly women, now being handed up as the place to put radioactive waste. No wonder this is causing extreme angst in the hawker community. Not to mention the impact that it is going to have on the local tourism in that area. The Flinders Ranges are beautiful. It is an untouched wilderness. People come from all over the world to see the Flinders Ranges and to spend time there. It's something that South Australians are extremely proud of. And yet this government wants to turn it into a radioactive waste dump. The other location that has been flagged in South Australia, of course, in Kimba, is smack bang in the middle of prime agricultural land. South Australia has a green, clean grain reputation. The idea of putting a nuclear waste dump, radioactive waste, in the middle of where we export our grain from is a slap in the face to the industry in South Australia and to the communities who rely on it. Again, no community consensus, no social licence, and just heavy-handedness from this government. And I might just add, Madam Deputy President, that the Greens will fight this all the way, from the federal perspective and from the state perspective, because we don't want this radioactive waste dumped in the Flinders Ranges. We don't want it dumped on our prime agricultural land. And we certainly don't want the ports of Port Pirie, Whyalla, Port Lincoln turned into highways of ships full of radioactive waste, which is what, Madam Deputy President, has now been admitted by this government will happen if these dumps are created. These ports and these port communities in our state have every right to have their say on this issue too, and yet they've been locked out of the process, kept in the dark and told that everything will be A-OK and doesn't affect them. It is just simply abhorrent that the South Australian community is being treated like this. We have fought as a South Australian community a national waste dump in our backyard before, and we won, and we will do it again. Make no mistake, Madam Deputy President, this fight has only just started.
Thank you, Senator Hanson-Young. Senator